Hey guys, it's Shaylin. I'm here today with another writing video. I am not super excited about today's video because in today's video I'm going to be doing the tier ranking my first lines video. My friend Rachel from Rachel Writes recently did this, so credit to her for this idea. But in the comment section of her video, I was summoned to do this. So thank you for that, you guys who made this happen. I don't want to do this video. Not because I'm gonna have to share really cringy lines that I wrote with you when I was like 13, 14, 15 years old, though I am. I'm sure you guys will be nice and understanding of the fact that I was very young when I wrote some of these. The reason I don't want to do this video is because I actually genuinely do not remember what these old lines are. I have fully repressed anything that I wrote prior to around 2017. It's just in a box at the deepest part of my mind that I never want to open again, because I cannot go about my life with any sense of mental peace or clarity if I have knowledge of these words that I have written. So I do not read my old writing. I have repressed it. I don't remember it. In order to do this video, I'm going to have to undo so much work that I've put into squeezing hundreds, thousands of words that I wrote as a teenager into my little repression box. And I'm going to have to open that box, and I don't know what's going to come out. So I have not looked at the lines before this video, so I'm going to be live reacting to them, ranking them in a tier list video. So if you guys like the style of video, if you think it's fun, let me know. I have thought of doing the one where I tier rank my short stories. In our tier list, we have 4 tiers. The lowest tier is Burn It. This is for lines that are just so stupid, so cringy, so bad that they should be burned, they should be locked away in my repression box. I put them there for a reason. They're just terrible. The second tier is You Tried, I Guess. This is like, it's pretty bad, but at least it's not the worst thing ever written. The third tier is Interest Peaked. This is for something that's like, okay, like it's not amazing. My mind is not blown, but like, okay, there's something there. And then the top tier is Shakespeare's Quaking, for lines that I think are just genius, brilliant. I was really drinking the first line juice when I wrote that line. It was a moment of brilliance, and I'm very proud of myself for those ones. To do this video, I also did prepare some log lines. So we're gonna go in order through all the books that I've written. I'm not doing my short stories, but I did include my first short story collection, Peridolia. So just the first line of the first story. I didn't include my second collection, Forgive Me I'm on Fire, in this video because the story that I plan to have as the first story isn't published yet. There are also a couple books on here that I haven't really started yet technically, but I have written the beginnings because I usually do write beginnings to like figure out the voice fairly early. So let's start. We're gonna start with my first ever book, which I wrote started when I was 13 and then finished when I was 14. And it's called Silver Bird. This is a middle grade adventure mystery. This is a terrible book, right? And my pitch for it is gonna make it sound good. And you're gonna say, hey, that actually sounds good. That sounds cool. It's awful. Everything about it is embarrassing and awful because I was 13. But I do think conceptually it's kind of cool. I kind of consider it like the Mysterious Benedict Society meets The Truman Show, maybe. When she gets stranded on an island, an orphan must solve a series of riddles and clues to figure out how the island is connected to her parents and how she can escape. So the first line of this book is a line of dialogue. I can't believe I started on dialogue. We're off to a bad start. It's, ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. So the first line of this book is like an announcement on a plane before the plane crashes. Honestly, that's not as bad as I thought it would be. I'm gonna put that in You Tried, I guess. Like, it's not actively the worst thing I've ever written. It could have been so much worse. I was braced for the worst. But actually, that's, like, not terrible. Is it good? No. Do I like starting with dialogue? No. I'm actually not deeply humiliated. Now, granted, I did not allow my gaze to skim past line 1 of that. So the next book that I wrote was called The Winter Run. This was a YA dystopian novel. Obviously, I wrote this when I was like 14, 15. It was what, 2011, 2012? Around that era. I think it was 2012. So of course I was writing a YA dystopian book. My logline for this is, an assassin living in a world of eternal winter attempts to journey to a safe zone so she can earn immunity from her crimes. Okay, so the first line of The Winter Run is, My fingers twitch impatiently inside my gloves. The box in front of me is beckoning. What the? This is not good. So that's gonna go in burn it. What? I have nothing to say that is redeeming about this first line. I hate it. The way it's phrased is so awkward. It just feels like it's trying so hard and it's failing so hard in trying so hard. So my third book here is the definition of impossible. I don't really know what genre this is. It was YA. Let's call it supernatural. It was like a contemporary book, but it was supernatural. Does that make sense? My logline here is, after being involved in a mysterious accident that kills her twin sister, a logically minded teenager is sent to a boarding school where she falls in with a group of students who have strange supernatural powers, but learns that these powers have devastating consequences. Very generic sounding. It was actually a really weird book. Like, there was actually some kind of cool stuff going on there, I think. It's the first book that I wrote where, looking back, I'm like, you were kind of onto something with that. Concept, bad. Execution, bad. Concept behind the execution, good. I tried to rewrite this a few years ago, but I think the first line is the same. Every chapter had like a third-person omniscient verse little snippet, and so it starts with one of those snippets. Honestly, in my mind, Alice could be described as a victim of fate. She could more accurately be described as a criminal. I'm actually kind of impressed. I'm actually gonna put that in interest peaked. I think that the real first line, when it actually starts with narrative, is probably way worse, but like, I'm just gonna count that as a win and keep going and like not look where I don't want answers and just close out of the document, call that interest peaked, call that a win. So the next book that I wrote is called Chaos Theory, but at the time that I wrote it, it was called Chain Reaction. It was like a science fiction psychological thriller, I would say. I also rewrote it as a TV pilot in university. Honestly, I think the old original draft is like really, really, really bad. I did rewrite a beginning for it. I don't know, do I dredge up the really, really old one? Okay. My logline for this book is, con artist by night, forensic science student by day, Gemma invents a new chemical compound with dangerous but powerful properties, but ends up in a deadly triangle of manipulation with the two other scientists involved in the project. I'm gonna go with the beginning of Chaos Theory, not the original Chain Reaction, just because the line from the original Chain Reaction is just very boring. Like, it's like not even that interesting. So I'm gonna go with the beginning from Chaos Theory. Technically, this begins with like a fact, like each chapter was an element, like starting at hydrogen and going up. And so technically it begins with a fact, which is 75% of the universe's mass is comprised of hydrogen, but that is not a very interesting line. So we're just gonna skip that and go to the actual first line, which is, it's 5 a.m. and the girl is arriving home from a one-night stand. I'm gonna put that in interest peaked. It's not like mind-blowing or anything, but I think it has a good sense of voice and rhythm. I think you can tell that I wrote this a bit later on. It would have been like 2018 or something that I rewrote this beginning. And so I think it has like a sense of rhythm and voice that my older writing doesn't have. There's like a really interesting point of view happening there, I think. I think there's an interesting sense of voice and point of view, so I'm gonna put that in interest peaked. So the next book that I wrote was Don't Underestimate the Wolf, which is just the winter run again. I wrote the winter run when I was quite young, and a few years later I decided to try writing it again. Because I had written the winter run as a dystopian, it was like futuristic, and that just like did not work at all. Like, it was just frankly impossible that this one girl would survive the entire military chasing her in a sci-fi setting where they have like helicopters and stuff. So I rewrote it to be more of a fantasy. There was no magic though, but kind of almost like a medieval style setting. It was like technically in the future, but like the level of, there was no like futuristic technology. Added a second POV. It was honestly a huge waste of my time. I should have just called the winter run a learning experience, cut my losses and moved on with my life, but I didn't. Instead, I decided to beat a dead horse and rewrite it, and it was over 100,000 words long, and it was terrible. Okay. Just want to say that I completely had no idea what this first line was. I thought it was going to be god awful. I thought it was going to be the worst thing I've ever read. But the first line of this is, this story starts with me burying my mother. I'm putting that in interest peaked. Maybe I'm just impressed with myself because I was braced for the worst there. Okay, I will take it. The next book that I wrote was called I'm Fine, and I wrote this in 2015, and it was a young adult contemporary book My logline is after the death of her mother, an aspiring photographer finds a way to cope with her grief by trying to solve the mystery behind a broken gravestone. I do not remember the first line of this book. I do remember what the first scene is, and I think the first line is going to be really cringe. First line is, I tap my fingers on the desk in a nervous skitter. I don't like it. This is going in Burn It. I don't like it. It's one of those lines, again, it just feels like it's trying too hard, but it doesn't really give you anything. Like, it's just like a character action that is supposed to be intense. The next book that I wrote after that was The Dragon Tear, which I am mortified to look at this. I'm truly mortified. So this was a high fantasy novel, and it's like probably my least favorite book I've ever written. If I was doing a tier ranking of every book I've ever written, this would go in Burn It. It's probably my least favorite book I've ever written, and the reason it's my least favorite book I've ever written is because the stuff I wrote before, I'm a bit gentler with myself because I was so young. It's like, okay, Silverbird is garbage. You know, I was, how old when I wrote that? 13, 14? So I'm gonna be pretty gentle with myself. Who's expecting a 13-year-old to be good at writing novels, or good at writing in general? No one. But I think because I wrote The Dragon Tear when I was, like, 18, 19, I feel like at that age I should have had a better sense of how to write a book and not make it flaming garbage. But it's just, I think that a lot of writers go through this. There's this really awkward point in writer development where you're just on the cusp of figuring out what your style is, and right before you reach that point where you figure out your style, and I literally was right before that point, like I think I hit that point where I figured out my style 6 months after I wrote this book. But when you're just on the cusp of that, your writing is the most melodramatic, the most cringy. So it seems that I skipped the logline for this book, so movie magic, jumping in now, here it is. The young heirs to the thrones of Rakaya find the world they expected to one day rule in a state of upheaval as those in power all seek to become the soul child, a rumored mystical being with immense power. I just think it's like a really cringy time for my writing, and so I'm mortified to look at this. I don't want to do it. These are definitely original first lines. I never change the first lines of these books. Okay, so there's a prologue and a first chapter to this book, but I'm just going to read the first line of the prologue because that's what you would read if you were reading the book. So the first line of the prologue is, the newborn had his father's eyes bright, deep, and green. I hate this first line. The thing is, I think the reason I hate this first line is because to me, I think it has zero significance. So what the prologue of this book is one of the POV characters, it's at his birth. So like the rest of the book obviously takes place like 20 years later, but it's at his birth, and he's the oldest son of this family line, so he's expected to be like the heir to the throne. He's like, this is the royal family. He's like the first and only person ever in this royal family to be born without magic, and so then instead they lie and say that he was stillborn, and basically just like hide him because he's not magical. He's also like my least favorite character just because I did really, like, that's actually an interesting setup for a character, but like I did a really bad job with his character development. The reason I hate this first line is because it has no significance. So what this prologue is this baby being born and then being like, oh my god, yay, we just had a baby. And then I don't know how, but they know that the baby isn't magical. I can't remember. Somehow they can like sense that through like magic or something. And then deciding that they're gonna lie and say that he died. Here's the thing. His eye color has nothing to do with that. It's not like your eye color is a signifier of whether you have magic or not. Like, those things are unrelated. So this first line is just pointless. I want to put it in Burn It. I feel like I could maybe put it in You Tried, I guess. Like, it's not the worst thing. When I think of it just on its own, I don't think it's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. So I'm gonna put it in You Tried, I guess. But, like, it's not good. After The Dragon Tear, I wrote Someone Will Save You. Someone Will Save You is another YA contemporary novel. And I wrote this at the end of 2016, and the quality between Someone Will Save You and The Dragon Tear is ridiculous, and I wrote Someone Will Save You in the same year. I've since rewritten Someone Will Save You, and it's a lot better than the original draft, but even the original draft compared to the original draft of The Dragon Tear is like night and day, which is wild because I wrote them in the same year. My logline for Someone Will Save You is, after her childhood best friend commits suicide, Luna finds a postcard on the ground inviting the finder to write back if they need help. But when she responds, she finds that this anonymous person's intentions may not be so pure. I rewrote this in 2018. The first line of this book has always been the same. So the first line is, when I was 8 years old, my mother told me our kitchen was haunted. I honestly like that, but I'm gonna put it in interest peaked. Actually, you know, I do really like this line because I like the way it circles back. Then at the end of this first chapter, it circles back. It's like, turns out it wasn't it wasn't my mom's kitchen that was haunted, it was her daughter. I'm gonna put in Shakespeare's Quaking, actually. Maybe we'll move it later, but I actually really like this first line. Obviously it sounds a little young, but it is a YA book and the voice is supposed to be kind of quirky. I actually think that this has like significant amount of meaning. It's not like you know what, actually I'm gonna move the dragon to a line to burn it. It deserves to be there. It has no meaning. It means nothing. It's meaningless in that book. It's like the start of a 5-book series and the first line is just wasted space. The Someone Will Save You first line actually like has meaning and relevance and like circles back and is actually like a really good indicator of the tone and the character and the themes, and introduces 2 characters. Actually, now that I think about it, that first line is pulling a lot of weight. So that's going in Shakespeare's Quaking. The next book is actually my short story collection, Peridolia. I wrote the first story that I wrote for this collection in 2016 and the last story that I wrote for the collection in 2020. The story that's first is Cherry and Jane in the Garden of Eden. That story is published. It's published online, even if you want to read the whole thing. Do I think Cherry and Jane in the Garden of Eden has the strongest first line of any first line in that book? Not necessarily, but I decided to put that first because as a whole, I think the story just did a good job of setting up the overall style of story and the themes and types of characters and aesthetic. I wrote that piece fairly late. It's actually one of the last stories that I wrote. I wrote it in near the end of 2019. So the first line of the book, which is the first line of Cherry and Jane in the Garden of Eden, is, I answered an ad for a summer house sitting job and drove 2 hours into the hills to get there. I really like this first line. I think there's something kind of ominous about it. Is it my best work? I'm gonna put it in interest peaked, not Shakespeare's Quaking, just because I think I have to be sparing with my Shakespeare's Quaking, but I think it's like on the border between them, because I do think it's a really good first line. So after that is Honey Vinegar. Okay, so my logline for Honey Vinegar, this is a literary fiction coming of age novel, and it's my magnum opus. So my logline for this book is, a young herbalist saves her sister from a lightning strike, but the event becomes the center of an evolving folktale that she cannot control. Let's do this, baby. I'm not nervous for this one at all. The first line of Honey Vinegar is, my mother named me and then I didn't see her for 13 years. This first line has never changed. It is going in Shakespeare's Quaking. This is the best first line I've ever written. I feel like the moment that first line popped into my head, it kickstarted a sense of momentum that just carried for the rest of the book. I will just have my moment of ego by saying that this is a beautiful first line. I think it wonderfully sets up key relationships and themes and ideas that are in the book but not in too obvious a way. This is a fantastic first line. I have no gripes with it. I don't know where this came from, but it's perfect, and I'm going to now pull myself out of my little ego and go to the next one. The next first line is Holding a Ghost. This is a book that I am currently editing, and my logline for it is so bad because this is like a plotless Bildungsroman. So my logline is very terrible, so please forgive. This sounds like a worse book than my crappy books that I wrote when I was 13, but my logline is, 4 years after her mother's death, June leaves the commune she was raised in, but realizes she has no sense of self outside her grief. However, a ghost in her house recognizes her potential and decides to use her to try and experience life again. It's not that good a capturing of what the book is about, but whatever. This is like an I'm Fine reboot, basically. I've talked about this before, but I'm Fine, not a good book that I wrote when I was very young. This is like me redoing it, but with literally an entire different concept and plot. The only thing that's the same is the main character, and even a bunch of stuff about her is different. So it's a different book, but I'm Fine just kind of like was like a precursor idea that evolved into this eventually. So the first line of this book is, you just leave one day before the sun has even risen. So, okay, I like this first line. I don't think it's jaw-dropping. Like, the Honey Vinegar first line, when I read that, it, like, gets me. I don't feel that way about the Holding a Ghost first line. You know, I think it's nice. I think it's lyrical. I think it's interesting because it's in second person, but I don't think it's, like, the best first line ever written. So I'm putting that in interest peaked. It's not amazing, but it's, like, I think it gets the job done. And anything more intense I don't think would suit how fragile the tone and mood of that book is, but it's not anything unreal. Okay, so now we are getting into kind of the stragglers. This is stuff that I'm currently writing or have written a beginning of, but haven't really fully started drafting. And so the first one is Where We Seek Dawn, which is my fantasy personal project. So I'm writing this, but I'm not attempting to publish it. It's just for me. It was very hard to come up with a logline for this because it's just like a bunch of different characters and they all have different plot lines. So the logline that I read for this book in the video didn't really make sense or at all explain what this book was about. It's kind of a difficult book to explain in a logline, but this is the best that I could do. Two assassins meet when sent to kill the same target on the same night, which draws them and those around them into the secret plot brewing under the war, threatening to tear their world apart. Is that really what it's about? Not really, but that makes it sound like an actual book, and not really the actual book, which is just four assassins having relationship drama, while all of the important stakes kind of just happen in the background. But we're gonna pretend that this is an actual book. So the first line is, "She will walk out of the sun." I think it's just fine, you know, it's gonna go in introspect. I think it's fine. So after that is Saltbirds, which is the book that I'm currently drafting. I just started drafting it, and it is also literary fiction coming of age book. My logline is, when their parents leave them to join a cult, Rowan is sent to live with their brother and his newlywed wife, Susanna, but they're willing to do anything to get sent home, even entering into dangerous affairs with Susanna and her aloof stepbrother. This first line requires the first two sentences, so I'm kind of gonna cheat and do the first two sentences because I feel like it's like a two-parter. What can I say about the fire? It did nothing to remind me of my mortality. And that's going in Shakespeare's Quaking. The first scene is a very short scene, and it's literally the main character burning something down, and I think that that's a pretty fun way to start a book. Like, the first chapter of this book is wild. In the first scene, the main character burns something down, and then one page later finds out that their parents have left them to join a cult. It is wild. So I'm putting that in Shakespeare's Quaking because that is the level of drama that I think Shakespeare would be proud. So we have two more. These are both books that are kind of like the two books I plan to write next, but I have written beginnings for them. The first one is Lambs Playing God. This is also a literary fiction coming of age book. I have a type. What can I say? My logline for this book is, a sheltered girl raised in a gated religious community explores the outside world for the first time when her sister decides to run away and finds her a new replacement sister. Again, I actually don't think that's a very good logline, and I think I could have done a much better job of representing the book and what it's about. But I feel like that logline did not capture the stakes or key relationships. This was not a rank my loglines video. Okay, so the first line is, I suppose the problem is that I wanted to be my sister. I think that that gets the job done. Okay, I'm just gonna do a little bit of rearranging here. I'm putting chaos theory in you tried, I guess, because we're gonna balance out the fact that the original first line was pretty bad and then I did a better one. So we're gonna just balance that out. And then I'm gonna put Lambs Playing God in interest. Like, again, it's a pretty subtle book, so having a really wild first line where someone dies, like in some of my other first lines, wouldn't really make sense. But I think that it's poetic. It feels very poetic, and I think it suits the tone of the book. So the last one here is Winter Houses. Winter Houses is every genre. It's like literary fiction, but it's also apocalyptic, but it's also like a crime noir. So it just has a lot going on. My logline for that book is, a mortician's secretive past is revealed when she is accused of the murder of a girl she has never met. Again, I don't think that logline does a very good job of expressing the actual stakes of the world, but we're working with what we have here. So the first line of Winter Houses is, I've changed every name in this story except for yours, mine, and the girls. I actually really like this first line. I'm gonna put that in Shakespeare's Quaking, to be honest. Point of view is really interesting. I think I like how much tension is in that first line because it hints that like the stakes are extremely high if the narrator of the story can't even tell the story with like the real names of the characters. Now that we've gone through everything, is there anything we want to change? The first thing I'm going to do is move Silverbird to Burnet. I think I had very low expectations and the real line was just above them. And so I didn't put it in Burnet, but I don't like that first line. It's a terrible first line, so I'm moving that to Burnet. Is there anything that I want to move to You Tried, I guess? Honestly, I'm gonna move the Where We Seek Dawn to You Tried, I guess. It's fine. I don't actively dislike it, really. I don't know, something about it just feels kind of generic. And I think that this is tough but fair. I believe that I was. I would just like you to leave in the comments the first line of the oldest thing that you wrote, and a first line that you like. So we can see the growth. because I think the main takeaway from this video is look at the growth. Look where I started, okay? I started so low and I worked my way up, but we had to go through so much cringe to make it happen. The key theme of this video is growth and learning. So that's all for this video. Thank you guys so much for joining me along this exploration into the depths of my psyche and hard drive. Things that I locked away 5 folders deep to hopefully never open or witness them again, and they've been witnessed. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video.